That was better. Lines became curves. Curves became shapes. Shapes came to life. Across the floor of the pigsty I had scattered picture after picture. From the moment I pulled myself through the small gap, hounded by the taunts and pursuits of my fellow slaves, I had retrieved the charcoal. The taste of the floor's corner reminded me not to throw it away again, and set to work. I didn't think, I didn't consider. I just drew, as ever allowing my subconscious to take over, to draw what came to my mind first. Soon my journal had a few good new entries. I had struck past last night's picture as fast as I could to add more and see what they would bring. 1 page, 10 minutes work. Wicked slits knife, with her eyes gazing from behind. Another page, 5 minutes work. Myself and the cart with darkened lines to add the weight. Another page, 3 minutes work. The pit, sketchy and terrible. Page after page filled with imagery of my time here. Even in my drawings, I couldn't escape it. I had wanted a picture of her before I forgot her face, but it just wouldn't come out. Like a machine in Philly's foundries, working to the same pattern, I found my sketching fell into patterns I could not control. Once, a rare slave that actually conversed with me had asked why I never chose what I drew. How could I? Choice was not mine to have by birth. But now I wondered, at the end, now with nothing else to live for, no work to be done any more, what if I chose to draw something nice? That mare's wondrous hope in her voice as she said that drawing could be an escape of itself rung in my mind. I took another page, leafed the parchment over, and gripped the dirty charcoal in my mouth loosely. Perhaps if I drew some random lines, then made what I wanted from it, maybe that would work. Trembling, each sweep of the charcoal didn't seem to add anything. How could this ever work? I didn't have the mindset or the belief to ever think for myself. All I was doing was I saw potential. With gusto, my charcoal flew onto the paper. Instinct, not restricted to my life, kicked in. Artistic form, the things I look at, specific memories, flared in my head. Curling up next to my mother, stealing from my master back on the rock farm, running away to hide in Philadelphia, mouthing off under my breath at Slit, and sitting with another pony glancing at my journal without any hint of duration. For the first time, and as long as I could remember, I drew for myself. I jolted back from the paper, breathing hard as I dared to let my eyes descend upon what I beheld before me. It was me. Just me. Just that small pony staring back at me from the bottom left of the page. Not even filling the space I could have, like it was waiting on some pony else to fill the gaps beside him with something else. It was smiling. My hoof went to my mouth. When had I last smiled? I honestly couldn't remember. But here it was. My sketch's lips curled upwards in a joyful, playful laugh that I wish I could have heard for real.
Hey! Run! You ready? They're calling for you! Time to die!
I ignored it. This was more important. I threw the page over and grabbed the charcoal again. Lines into curves. Curves into shapes. Shapes into...
Life is overrun. We can see them coming to chain you all up and drag you there.
Charcoal flew. I drew faster than I ever had before. I was in control of this, not them. I could control what I drew. The form came to be the mare. She was looking curious, staring off the page at me, as though trying to work out why I had drawn her. I could choose. I could create anything.
Murky number 7, you are ordered to the pit. Come out, be chained, and let's get going so we can all win some caps on you.
The voice of the enclosure master. Oh, goddesses, no. I had just learned how to do this. Yet I could feel my legs trying to pull myself on conditioned instinct to obey. I tried to reach for the paper once again. One more. I can go one more and just be laid out. The charcoal snapped at the tip from how hard I was pressing. The drawing went messy. It didn't matter. Stains of tears were appearing on it. I choked down the embarrassment at crying over something as silly as all this, as I felt a rap on the
pigsty. You there, slave. Is Murky number 7 in here?
You bet he's cowering like a...
There was a crunching sound, followed by the sound of some pony hitting the ground hard. I didn't ask you for your opinion. Guards, tear this damn thing apart and get him out here.
Oh, Luna, help me. I felt the sty shake and buckle under their savage hoof blows on either side. The drawing was only just taking shape. I knew what it was. It was... The roof snapped off. Smog and dust seethed in from the outside world as a silhouetted gas mask glared in and spotted me frantically scribbling. I squealed as I felt a second slaver grab my jerkin in his teeth and effortlessly lift me. Whining in pain as my bruised ribs protested at the sharp movement, I pulled down with all my meager weight. One more line. The pulling intensified as a second guard joined. No! Please! I begged them as I felt the charcoal fall into my mouth. I have to see her! Once more! With a great tug I was yanked through the splintered wall of the pigsty and thrown on the ground, weeping in a heap. I spat out the foul charcoal and reached out for my journal as 2 guards magically hog-tied me with chains before dragging me away. The journal had fallen open on its side, visible to me as I was pulled off, writhing and screaming through tears to be reunited with it. The picture I had so desperately tried to finish stared directly back at me, tugging at my heart and stirring emotions long dead. My mother, once again being forced to watch me being taken from her. I was going to die. I lay against the wall of the pit's slave confinement area, feeling the cold concrete seeping its chilly touch through my torn jerkin. It was dark, the only light being that coming in from the pit itself. A thick gate sat at the front of the area. The only thing that separated me from death now. Not that I could think too much about the gate. I was much too busy screwing my wet eyes closed and cowering in the back corner with my hooves trying to cover my suffering ears. The crowd were like a sonic blast of pain. Their screams and bloodthirsty bellows echoed down into the enclosed black gate side of the arena with me. Their hooves' stomps in freaky unison felt like a slap around the head each time. I was going to die. I didn't want to die. The massive noise subsided down from an assault on my senses to being merely uncomfortable as I heard the announcer start talking up the crowd. That big griffin, whatever her name was. Her words whipped them up into a frenzy. I could picture them salivating, eagerly sharing the stories of the little buck whom they would all get to watch being horribly torn apart. Opening my eyes, I looked around, shivering. At the front stood numbers 1 and 2. Philadelphia pit matches apparently involved 2 teams of 6 ponies. You fought 1-on-1. The winner remained to fight the next battle. Black Gate was my team. Numbers 1 and 2 seemed to know one another, Red Mare and Dull Yellow Stallion respectively. They looked tough, but then every pony looked tough compared to me. Even that little unicorn mare who was number 3 looked like she could buck me senseless with that metal thing on her foreleg. Number 4 was nothing special. Some blue buck. I was number 5. The one to die after those 4 got killed off. It would happen. I had seen pit fighter ponies before in Philadelphia. They were hard as nails, with a bad attitude that would revel in the howling of the crowd as they took apart their opponents with as much... I gulped. As much pain as possible. I was going to die painfully. Once again I found the corner, squeezing myself into it as tightly as I could, and prayed that the other ponies in this team wouldn't hear me crying. Unfortunately, luck never was quite on my side, as I sensed the hulking movement from beside me. Number 6.
Put on a braver face there. Don't let them have the pleasure.
A significantly deep, low, and mature stallion's voice that almost trembled with a threat of painful volume if he really got going. Okay, that I didn't expect. Through terrified and tear-filled eyes, I looked up at the source,
to see number 6. Looming in the darkness at the back of the black gate pen, number 6 filled the entire portion he took residence in. He was kneeling down on all fours, and was still taller than me. A huge, muscular earth pony with a dark red coat and crimson mane looked down at me. He was, without a doubt, the biggest and scariest pony I had ever seen in my life. I could barely even tell where the thick, muscle-ridden back separated from his neck. Wicked Slit was a little filly foal compared to this stallion. An ugly, scar-coated face stared back at me, one eye completely bloodshot, and one ear missing entirely. Dyed tribal markings coated his body in black swirls, designed to look like, well, anything painful. I saw barbed wire rings on his forelegs, angular designs around the bloodshot eye, and gang symbols upon his sides. Almost a third of his body was covered in them. Puckered scars intertwined with the markings. When he moved, even slightly, the huge mass of muscle contained in his body became all the more obvious. But those eyes, wild and filled with promise of absolute violence, they scared me to the point of backing away from him. He was absolutely terrifying. His face followed me as I crossed the darkened area, trying to get away from him. I glanced behind me. 1 and 2 were staring out at the expanse of the pit. 4 seemed to be explaining something to 3. No pony was paying us any attention. I squeaked in terror. I didn't like being left alone with this massive, half-feral earth pony. He just sat there, staring at me, trotting away from him. With a deep sigh, he looked toward the gate.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Officially confused now, I tilted my head towards him even while backing my rump right up against the wall. What? I didn't dare raise my voice above that of a hushed whisper. Who knew what those other ponies were like up at the front of the Blackgate slave area?
I'm sorry you need end up here with me.
He continued, shifting to his hooves. By the sweet goddesses, he was huge! Add to that, none of it seemed to be anything but corded muscle. Suddenly, I felt pretty glad he wasn't on the other team. You're sorry?
I'm sorry that I cannot protect you.
His voice hit a low note, and an odd ring of sadness surrounding the bestial imagery he evoked in his accent and appearance.
You don't deserve this. Not like some of the rest of us do.
I didn't know what to make of that. I wasn't given an opportunity to make anything of it.
Round 1!
Came the booming voice of the Griffin announcer. I turned and looked out of the gate as it began to rise.
May the games begin.
I heard the huge stallion mutter as he trotted up beside me, eyes narrowed. Suddenly, although I knew I wouldn't be around to see it, I felt pity for whatever poor mare or buck ended up going hoof to hoof with him. I still felt more pity for myself. I was going to die. My composure was not improving. I stood behind 3 and 4 as I watched whom I now knew to be called Blood go out first into the arena and swiftly be torn down. I had to physically stuff a hoof in my mouth to stop myself from howling in fear as I shrank back, knelt down, and tried to blot out the cries of the crowd as they spotted death in their sights. Part of my mind liked to pretend that I could hear the bullies braying for my blood to be next. Beside me, number 6 stared down at me with those wasteland-worn eyes before looking up, as though judging the opposition. I could hear him whispering something to himself, but with so much ambient noise, even I couldn't figure it out. Oh goddesses, that would be me out there. Number 2 stepped forward as the gate opened. The announcer cried his name as I saw him clearly go looking for revenge. Daffodil. Closer to the gate now, I got a better look outside. The pit itself was an old ice rink, drained till only the concrete remained, and sheathed in a giant cage filled with pressure plates and old blood stains mixing with the new stains draining away from Blood herself. Some of it was splattered across her opponent. Sin something. I had missed his name from covering my ears against the painful noise of the crowd. Once again I witnessed death. Daffodil's opponent stood no chance. He even tried standing on a pressure plate to activate a bucket load of mines from above, trying to rain them on Daffodil. The big buck swiftly dodged the deafening shockwave, before delivering the most horrifying death I had ever witnessed. One after another I heard, all too clearly, the snaps. He broke his opponent's bones. All of them. While he was still alive. I felt my legs go weak. Great heaves in my throat became choking sobs as my eyes flooded with tears, and terror overtook me. I ran to the back of the slave area, where the door was, where we had been brought in. I had to get out. I didn't want to die. As I approached it, the 2 guards assigned to supervise us, along with the 3rd slaver whom had slapped these numbers on our flanks, were waiting. With a laughing shove, the trio hurled me right back into the Black Gate area once again. I curled up. More sickeningly wet cracks came from the arena, each in turn with a roar from the crowd. I don't want to die. I don't want to die.
Round 3. From the Black Gate, we still have Daffodil.
I tried to tune that griffin out. Each round brought this one step closer to me. Blood was down. Daffodil wouldn't last 5 more fights. And the 2 ponies in front of me were, well, they weren't number 6. That behemoth of a pony still stood as silently as ever, just staring into the arena from beside me. Briefly, I tried to repress my terrified thoughts, to concentrate on the artistic side of his dyed coat and its designs. Let's see. Barbed wire? Sharp edges? Not helping. Shivering and trying to fight my imagination showing such thoughts of a drawn-out end to me, I instead took a look at the other 2 ponies. Number 4 wasn't anything special, just another slave from Philadelphia. I wondered what he had done to deserve this. Probably something a little less cowardly than my own. Number 3. It wasn't often I saw ponies whom I could look eye to eye without requiring to tilt my head upwards to do so. Well, I would if she wasn't facing away from me into the arena herself, as Daffodil finished pounding the corpse of his opponent. Briefly, my eyes glanced to that thing on her right foreleg. Some sort of device. Recognition flickered in my mind. Hadn't Master Red-Eye worn one of them? Momentarily, curiosity overcame fear as I gazed all the more. I couldn't see her cutie mark. That number sticker covered one side. Shifting quietly to the other, I noticed what it is. Another of those devices, right there on her flank. Just, what? What did that signify? Skill with them? Given I had no idea what they were, I realized any guessing was a bit pointless. Whatever it was, it couldn't be deadly. The slavers wouldn't have left it on her otherwise. So I couldn't even imagine her bringing down every one of the fighters to protect my worthless hide either. A momentary realization hit me as I realized I was craning my head to stare at her flank to see said cutie mark, and number 6 was glancing down at me with a raised eyebrow. With a start, I shrank back, averting my eyes. Damn it! Why did every pony assume that about me? I wasn't looking there. I didn't stare at mares like that. I just drew them. That was different. Number 6 just seemed to chuckle quietly, a sound like rocks scraping together. He fell into indomitable silence as he stared back into the arena, and narrowed his eyes. I followed his gaze to the concrete pit, and witnessed my killer. A zebra. The zebra. Even I had heard of her, the most terrifying pit fighter in Philadelphia. Exotic, lethal, and utterly without mercy, they said. No pony could hope to bring her down. A veteran of 4 events, and current crowd favorite to coldly murder any pony that dared stand in her way. Truth be told, I hadn't seen her before myself. I didn't know anything about her fighting style or capabilities. I didn't need to. Any zebra to gain that reputation must have one hell of an ability to back it up. I couldn't help it. I cowered, using number 3 to block my view of her as I crouched down, closer to the floor, and shivered. This just wasn't fair. Even on the floor, I could still see past 3's legs, through the grill of the gate. The zebra, what was her name? Zen? I couldn't hear anything over the ambience of the crowd shrieking with excitement at the sick games they were witnessing. The goddesses seemed to want to please those vicious mares and bucks that took out all their frustrations on us poor arena victims. The sun baked down from above the cloud curtain. The effect was less of a direct heat and more of a stifling ambient raising of temperature in the air, uncomfortable and hellish to suit the carnage currently being wreaked in the pit. This was wrong. I saw the combatants fight. I screwed my eyes shut as I saw Daffodil send the zebra to the ground. I winced as she returned the favor. Even above the crowd I could hear the savage hoof strikes on one another. I couldn't do this. I wasn't built for this. Daffodil was brutal and resourceful. The zebra, lithe and deadly. I saw a mine kicked into the air, and whinnied to myself as the savage detonation assaulted my senses. This wasn't fair. It certainly wasn't for Daffodil. Even as I watched the zebra continually begin to gain the upper hand, speed beat power, lethality trumped over savagery. With one hideous crunch, I heard his neck break. My mind raced. One more of hours down, and one more towards my own presence in there. I hadn't lived a good life. Just a slave. A dirty and downtrodden slave, with no freedom and no dreams of his own. As I watched number 3 bravely walk forward to her own death, I finally and completely broke down the moment the gate slammed shut. Emotion welled up. Fear mixed with the bitterness that I had never even been given a chance. Life seemed fit just to screw me over at every opportunity. All shame was thrown away as I did what I did best. Cried. I cried more than I ever had. Even more than the day my mother was taken from me, because now everything was about to be taken from me. I didn't want that. I didn't want to go through the pain. I was afraid of what they would do to me. I had thought that 1,000 times today, but now it finally rammed home with the full intensity as the zebra launched her at her newest prey. I was going to be beaten to death. The weight of that simple realization was impossible to grasp. I emotionally spilled over, pathetically reacting with no hint of dignity or poise. Numbers 4 and 6 stared at me as I pressed against the gate, whimpering, quaking violently, and trying not to look as I heard number 3 being brutalized and beaten to death even worse than Daff was. Why was it that my life had to go this way? Why me? I didn't want to die. I didn't. A spark, like a bright flare, erupted from the pit, catching my half-closed eyes like a beacon and blowing up dust from the pit's concrete through the gate into my face. A sound of magic being ignited came from the middle. Hyperventilating still, I shifted and fell backwards, covering my eyes with my hooves before slowly glancing through them, struggling to see directly into the light. An aura of unicorn power streamed from the center, enveloping the zebra entirely, as every barrel that hung above the pressure plates clanged open in unison. The green chemical flew from them, barely even touching the ground before being caught up in a swirling net of intense telekinetic magic. My jaw hit the floor, eyes unblinking as I witnessed the foul liquid spraying beautifully in all directions, coating the cage and blocking all vision into it. I had seen unicorn magic plenty of times, but never like this. Only my position near the floor let me see under the green goo smeared across the gate. I hadn't even blinked as it landed on either side of me. Luck, it seemed, allowed me to sit undisturbed before this miracle. Number 3. She flying without wings. I saw the scene that would be seared into my memory until the day I died. Amongst the drifting dust of the telekinesis spell, her horn bursting with overglow, number 3 ascended into the air above, taking with her the zebra that had so badly hurt her. A nimbus of magic surrounded them both as she flew directly upwards and away from all the blood.
all the death and pain. Away from slavery and to her glorious escape. Such courage in the sight of Red-Eye himself! I could hear the bloodthirsty crowd bellowing in protest and shock. The griffins opened fire. In vain. Their bullets missing her at every turn, like fate and destiny themselves, guided that little mare to be unharmed. An angel blessed by the goddesses, a light-bringer whose ray of hope smeared through the darkness to ignite a fire in my heart. I felt myself fall back and sit dumbly, my mouth hanging open as I witnessed the spectacle before me. Feeling the light cross my face, I must have been silhouetted against the gate, a small figure in the presence of a legend before my very eyes. Defying gravity so boldly, she disappeared into the searing dust and out of my vision, but for a steadily fading glow, to cast off the shackles of slavery and escape. The thought struck my mind as ridiculous, but here it was. The myths were true. A great unicorn of powerful magic escaping from her masters to live a free life. As I watched that wondrous and beautiful sight flow away in the dust cloud, through the rapidly fading chemical goo barrier, I felt myself smile. I had never felt joy like that before. It felt so good. I just wanted to keep smiling forever. I wanted to go with her. My mind struggled to grasp the concept, to identify it, and take hold of the urge. Even as I heard the slavers rush into the Black Gate area to secure us, and the bellowing of the griffins to trap the breakout before it left the fun farm, I had the first true inkling of something, a wish of my own. I dared to dream. I wanted to escape.
You, slave! On the ground now!
The slavers burst in from behind us, 2 guards and the third who slapped that sticker on my flank, moving to keep us down. I barely heard them. I simply sat with my eyes trained on the roof of the cage within the arena. The goo had run its course and the dust began to settle. All that remained above was a small opening. A previously padlocked swing door in the ceiling of the cage hung open, swaying in the aftermath of such magical fortitude. Something about that door struck a chord with me, just idly swinging, the last evidence of the defiance against Philadelphia's aim to keep us inside. I could still hear gunfire, explosions, and all sorts of noises as the crowd stampeded out of the arena. A slaver's hoof dragging me by the jerkin away from the gate was the first thing to waken me from my reverie.
I said on the damn ground, slave!
The slaver's voice betrayed a nervousness turned to anger. I didn't blame him. My own voice would probably be squeaky and incapable at the moment. I was still trembling, after all. With a twist, I was hurled on the ground as I heard shackles being drawn by the slaver's unicorn companion. Ha! Call that magic. Look at number 3, buddy. As they moved toward me, only as they began trying to pull my hooves up did I finally shake my head clear and get a grasp on why they were being as deliberate. The slaves were not taking this idly. Behind the door leading to Black Gate, I heard the sounds of rebellion. Slaves were crying out, rioting in the aftermath of one mare showing them there was more to hope for, and that Red-Eye could be defied. One slaver was watching the door, telling me that perhaps the slaves outside were not being beaten down as easily as the slavers would like. It seemed like number 6 thought the same way. The biggest pony I had laid eyes on in my life seemed to me to be a slow and deliberate stallion. I had imagined that an attack from him would be like a boulder rolling slowly, deliberate and implacable. Oh, how wrong I was. He moved like a boulder, all right, but one tumbling madly down a cliffside. The slaver didn't even stand a chance as the colossal weight of number 6 barreled into him, one giant hoof plowing the slaver's head into the concrete wall with enough force to make a sickening crunching sound. Suddenly I was very glad I couldn't see all too well. The slaver currently straddling me with the shackles looked up, eyes wide as he witnessed his brethren murdered in an instant before him. The third slaver turned from finishing his shackles on number 4 as well, both matching the cold stare of number 6. "You..." The slaver's voice quivered. "You stay right there! Stay!"
Funny, I was going to say the same thing.
Muttered number 6 dangerously before launching himself at the 2. I curled up as I felt his size run over me to reach him. A series of panicking screams and dull thumps as the pair were set upon by the terrifying pony. I risked opening my eyes. I saw number 6 moving like a blur, thick limbs lashing out wildly. He bucked one slaver against the wall, hard enough to whiplash the target's head back into it, spinning himself around to dive and grapple his second opponent, even as the slaver attempted to draw a baton with his mouth. With a grunt and a heave, the second slaver was roughly hurled across the black gate clean over my head to land in a heap with his colleague, the pair groaning in pain. Even as they attempted to stand, the first nursing his rapidly bleeding head, number 6 was on them. His forehead collided with the first target, the sound like a rock hitting a wall. The slaver dropped, unconscious in an instant, even as number 6 began beating the last slaver's head off the wall repeatedly. Eventually, a sharp pop signaled his end too, as his agonized screams suddenly ceased. Almost as an afterthought, wiping the sweat from his brow, number 6 raised a hoof and stamped it sharply on the unconscious buck's neck with enough force to... I felt sick. I had seen ponies beaten all their lives, but this was different. Slavers beat to intimidate. This pony had simply been killing them. Cold and calculated, the stallion had taken 3 slavers apart in less than a minute, with nothing other than sheer power and ferocity. Brute force at its most simple level. No, that wasn't right. Even as I watched him now, his eyes flickered to and fro. He was thinking, watching for other elements. Suddenly, why he had been paying such close attention to the arena earlier made sense to me. He wasn't about mindless brute force at all. That violence had been driven by a cold and pragmatic mindset that simply went for the kill, using unreal strength and viciousness to reach it however was most practical. Part of me wondered how he would have fared against that zebra. Agility and precision against deliberate fury and power. Until I remembered I would have been dead before I knew the outcome. I wasn't sure which scared me more, although looking at those mismatched and bloodshot eyes turning to glare at me, I reached a decision pretty quickly. Don't kill me too! I shrieked at him, backing away toward the gate, eventually pressing my back against it to stay away from the huge earth pony. I'll stay quiet, please! I barely even noticed as I had pressed my back against the gate that the green goo was burning the back of my neck. Fear of number 6 overrode any such feeling. He simply trode over to me, staring down. By the goddesses, his face was streaked with the blood of the slavers he had killed, the lines dripping off his muzzle oddly following the contours of his dyed coat markings. His face lowered to look me in the eyes. I found I couldn't even blink as I met his glare. That one bloodshot eye seemed to twitch a little on habit before he drew himself back a little, grabbed my jerkin in his mouth, and swung me to my hooves.
Come on, Pipsqueak.
He intoned, heading for the door.
Tag along and you'll maybe get out of this alive, too.
Surprise rang in my mind. I guess I didn't really have a choice. The underside of the pit was in absolute chaos. Even just outside the door to the black gate, I witnessed slavers lashing and threatening their slaves with whips, guns, and battle saddles. They were not going down quietly, for even as I crept out of the door in number 6's shadow, I saw one slaver pulled down by 4 weakened laborers after being beaten over the head with a magically hurled sledgehammer. Gunshots rang out every few seconds. I really needed earplugs, sending scattered screams and waves of fleeing slaves down the hallways. Number 6 didn't appear fazed. He glanced around before picking a direction and galloping off. I struggled to keep up with his long and determined stride. Diving to one side or the other, my gallop was nervous and unbalanced. What was I doing? The slaver told me to stay put. The little slave in my head screamed at me to cease and stop, that my masters would not appreciate this. Weapons were strewn on the ground where they had fallen from now unlocked guard storage. Slaves unable to grab one in time were arming themselves with tools and the occasional bit of furniture. I saw them trying to break into what I knew was the armory, where all the pit's more lethal weapons like firearms and magical auto-axes were kept to be put in the barrels. Screams sounded in the air as the smell of gunpowder reeked around me. I almost slipped in a few puddles that I was sure were not water, as I tried not to think about the wetness on my hooves. Ahead, a slave and an overseer of the pit came tumbling out of a doorway that held behind it a small fire. Even as they savagely wrestled on the ground, I saw scraps of paper rolling out behind them from the blazing room, with no evidence of how the fire had even started. Misfired magic, maybe? I ran through the smoke, holding my breath before tripping over a corpse on the other side, so suddenly that I still felt my legs trying to run, even as the world rotated by 90 degrees. My lower jaw slapped on the ground, with a painful rattle, jamming my teeth together. That loose tooth from this morning took its time now to remind me of its presence, with an uncomfortable little shimmy in its socket. Wincing and bringing a hoof to my mouth, I glanced around quickly before immediately feeling the urge to just stop. I saw slavers regaining control here. Normality was being restored as more and more slaves waiting for the next rounds in the back were beaten, shackled, or simply shot to quell their reactions. Before my eyes, I saw many of them murdered when they had already surrendered. Perhaps I should just lie down, let them shackle me. Don't take any chances. Flying without wings. No! The feeling in my heart was still too strong. The bonds were heavy on my conditioned mind, but I had now been shown the light. To dare to defy. I turned and galloped after number 6 once again, seeing that he had plowed ahead without waiting at all. Several slavers had tried to get in his way. Their mangled forms lay in his wake. As I dodged around them, I tried not to think about the fact that some of them were still wailing in pain. He was up ahead, diving down a side corridor. For a second I wondered why, before I heard the clatter of griffin talons on the floor around the next bend. Silently, thanking my ears for once in my life, I dove into the double doors of the corridor after number 6. To my great surprise, he was right beside them, slamming them shut the moment I was through. I fell against the wall, my sides aching and, well, everything else aching too. A radiation-sick and multiple times beaten little pony like me doesn't run too well. Behind us the griffins ran past, their talons making an all-too-obvious pattering noise. Given a chance to breathe, I looked up, and some more, at number 6. Why are you helping me? My voice was weak, panting, and hoarse.
Why not?
A deadpan reply.
You're not one of them. You don't have the killer instinct in your eyes. I know a place where you'll be safe. Than you probably are in whatever pit they have you. Tag along if you want, kid.
He narrowed his eyes, leaning down closer.
But I won't slow down. If you fall behind, you're getting left. I have to...
He stopped, his eyes glancing away down the hall, before returning to me. Somehow I got the impression he was only covering for having said more than he wanted. All the same, I nodded. Perhaps what he had was a little rebel outpost in the train tunnels of Philadelphia. A way to get out and find other ponies to escape with. All of us. Together! Only to go with him meant defying my master. Escaping to wherever this stallion wanted me to go. Thoughts clashed in my head as I watched the stallion creep forward, warily glancing around him with that same pragmatic look as before. I was a slave. What was I doing with all these thoughts in my head of escape, freedom, and dreams? Even my damned cutie mark was a set of manacles. I wasn't supposed to be away from this. But try as I might, that imagery of the little unicorn mare, showing such defiance, and escaping to the sky in front of me just would not go away. The freedom she had in the air like that. To be able to fly. Taking a deep breath, I turned, pulling my jerkin a little tighter around me before trotting after number 6. If I wanted out, do I really? Then I guess I would have to follow him. Show him that I am willing. Show myself that I can break these chains. Briefly, I wondered if a cutie mark could change. That would be nice. Perhaps a sketchbook on my flank, or a bird flying free. We began moving again, passing staff offices of the ice rink, and pausing only to check doorways. In truth, the back area wasn't particularly big. However, ruined walls and collapsed ceilings made much of it more like a dilapidated labyrinth. Truth be told, I was not feeling particularly safe. Even if I managed to get rid of the terror that my companion struck in me every time I saw him, well, at all, it was the fear of Whiplash, my master, appearing from nowhere to drag me back for punishment at this defiance.
This is the way.
I blinked on reflex at his voice and didn't reply. Somehow I had an imaginative sight of number 6 turning and breaking me in two for making any noise to disrupt his own escape. Whatever drove him, it was intense. I wondered what his name was, only now thinking to even bother checking his cutie mark. Whatever it meant, it wasn't cute. His massive body bore the mark of a battle-scarred and rusted shield, splattered with blood on either side. It made sense, I thought. He certainly was battle-scarred himself. His dyed coat bearing those sharp tribal symbols were matched only by the lines of wounds he carried. My mind wondered on the shield's significance, before settling on the obvious. He was certainly as tough as one to survive all that. I saw some blood from light wounds in the chaotic hallway run down across the cutie mark itself, mixing with the blood permanently showing on the icon itself. Something about it was darkly fitting. I found myself wanting to draw that, his mark. With a sudden realization, I felt a pang of loss at my journal being left behind at the fun farm, probably used as bedding by now by some other slave. Even with that unicorn saving my life, I doubted I would ever see that picture of my mother ever again now. Once again, I felt little tears forming in my eyes. Sometimes I really wished I didn't cry so much in front of others, but it was like an unstoppable, instinctive reaction. I almost walked directly into number 6's rump without thinking. He had stopped, staring at the doors in front of us. One was a standard office door, the other a fire escape to the outside. A temporary leap of hope came to my mind as I imagined us sneaking out under cover of the madness I could still hear outside, and escaping to wherever this stallion had in mind. Reality came crashing home right back down to the wastes by seeing the clunky form of one of those damned terminals beside it. The colorful swearing of my companion under his breath as he checked didn't seem to imply that he knew what to do with them either.
Locked. Why are they always locked? Ridiculous pieces of intellectual...
While reeling off a few words I had never even heard, he vented his frustration by bucking the wall with one leg beside him, the strike offering up a sharp crack as the plaster broke under his hoof. I heard a squeak at the sudden sound. Damn it, why do I always have to... That hadn't been me. My poor hurting ears had heard something from behind the office door. Motioning to number 6, I really needed to ask his name. I pointed with a hoof toward the office. With a narrowing of his brow, he turned and bucked the door open. Or, rather, clear off its hinges.
Out! Now!
He roared, diving into the room as I heard a scream of surprise and shock from within. Dragged by the tail, in number 6's teeth, a worker for Red-Eye was pulled into the corridor. The big stallion dumped him in front of the terminal, but held the buck's head looking down the corridor, away from it.
Right. I'm betting you know the way out.
He said, voice heavy but low and full of savage intent. He clearly just wanted this over with. I got the sense he didn't enjoy waiting around in the middle of what was fast to become almost a war zone if the riots escalated. No! I don't know any damn password to the terminal! He screamed in the stallion's face. I had to hand it to him. That was bravery. Or stupidity. I couldn't quite tell.
So you know the password, then.
Continued number 6, speaking factually, in a low tone, with a lethal-looking grimace. What?
I didn't tell you I wanted through a terminal.
Oh! The buck looked around at the terminal, and back to the big slave holding him. Shit!
Got that right?
Number 6 immediately turned him around and bodily dragged the worker over to the terminal. I stood in just as much surprise as him. I hadn't spotted number 6's simple ploy either. Clearly he wasn't stupid. All the same, though, I began to fear him again. He had that look in his eyes that I had seen before, when he pounced the slavers back in Black Gate. This wasn't a slaver he was holding, though. For all I knew, he might just be a promoted slave.
I ain't giving you the password, he bewailed. Sternwood got me!
I'll gut you if you don't do it now.
Countered Six.
Or perhaps I'll just start scalping your head off the wall until you do. Trust me, I know how to keep you conscious.
He lowered his eyes.
And even if you do pass out, I am very patient.
Screw you! Stern would kill me! There was a loud clang as the buck's head impacted on the metallic wall near the terminal, leaving a painful-looking indent.
The password!
Roared Six into his ear. I winced, holding my own ears and backing off as far as I could. I didn't like how this was going.
Fuck you, slave!
Clang! A second indent. Blood sprayed from his nose as he wailed in pain, before spitting some in Six's face.
Red Eye has things he could do to me you never could. I'm too scared of him to worry about you.
Clang! A third indent, deeper this time.
Shit.
He seemed to pass out until Six batted him across the face with a hoof. I didn't like this at all. This wasn't persuasion or defense. This was simple outright torture. Despite what he said to me, I did not feel reassured by this stallion one little bit. There was something just unrestricted about him. Like he chose to ignore all barriers of morality. If it hadn't been for his words earlier, I would probably just have ran. However, he was making progress. The worker's survival instinct had seemed to kick in, now begging for his life. I tried not to listen, to shut it out, and perhaps just hum to myself. Anything to avoid being part of this. Annoyingly, only one of that ridiculous Pink Pony songs came to mind from the Fun Farm speakers. Right now, giggling was the last thing I wanted to do. I had to duck into the office to be sick, feeling my shrunken stomach doing its best to evacuate the little it had.
Daring!
I heard the worker wail.
It's daring!
Now, wasn't that so simple?
Uttered Six, his gravelly, deep voice not even showing a hint of emotion before turning and unlocking both the terminal and then the door. It clicked as the bolt unlocked. With a satisfied snort, he turned to the worker. I saw murder in his eyes. He didn't want any pony left alive to spill the beans.
No! I told you!
The worker clambered, crying in pain as he tried to drag himself on one snapped leg. Oh, goddesses, it wasn't snapped at a joint. As number 6 snarled and dove for him. I managed to close my eyes in time, as I saw his hooves reach for the worker's neck. But even holding my ears didn't cut out the begs for mercy being cut short by an agonized squeal. Inside had been chaos. Outside was war. Slaves poured from the ice rink's stadium doors, still in huge and snaking surges of desperation. I saw slaves being crushed under the writhing masses of dirty ponies heading in all directions. When two different currents of crowds collided, they fell, screaming before being trampled to death. My own bruises from earlier seemed to throb in sympathy. No helpful mares were around to pull those poor souls out. Throughout it all, slavers galloped to and fro, pointing guns and screaming to round workers up. Many slaves made a break for it before being shot down, their cries standing out above the overall ambience of panic and disorder. Even here, a few feet from the side entrance, I was almost bowled over by terrified ponies, trying to escape the lashes or attempt to head for their own enclosures. How could any pony move through this? It was simply madness. But above the crowds, in the Fun Farm still, even more was happening. The Fun Farm roller coaster had somehow become active, the carts hurling around the tracks at breakneck speed. I witnessed guards opening fire on it. Who would end up in that thing? And why were they firing at it with a...
Get down!
I felt the stallion grab me roughly by the jerkin in his teeth and hurl me behind the garbage bins, kept at the back of the ice rink stadium, before diving in himself. The rocket, intended to detonate on the roller coaster, had missed, before arcing on an unclear trajectory to slam into the ground, nearby amidst a crowd. The concussive wave blasted my eardrums into a ringing deafness, even as I felt earth and wet mud splattering down around me, while holding my head to the ground. Shaking so badly I felt I might just fall over. I stood up and opened my eyes before closing them all right away. That hadn't been wet mud. I felt the stallion move. He was heading away already. Forcing my eyes open, I began to limp after him, my sprained joint aching on every step. With a start, I noticed my jerkin had been half pulled from my body by the stallion's rough throw. I staggered as I reset it around me properly before following as best I could. I couldn't avoid looking to the side, seeing the horrific aftermath of the missile strike on the crowd. A small crater surrounded by mutilated bodies and shrapnel-torn slaves. No doubt they would simply be left to die. No pony else helped them. They all just continued to run in panic, fearing another missile any second. Guilty feelings reminded me that I was hardly stopping either. Terror clenched my gut like a vice as I struggled to see the stallion up ahead. He stood a head above any pony else in the area, but with my size, fighting through a crowd was next to impossible. I had to keep moving. Any second another missile might land, or a slaver might open fire indiscriminately on the crowd. I had seen a couple doing just that earlier. Above, a wing of griffins soared over toward the roller coaster as I heard an immense crash from the building that housed Red Eye's operations in Philadelphia. The Fun Farm barn. Had the roller coaster's cars crashed into it? Smoke billowed from one side as I saw Red Eye's forces moving to congregate on it. My attentions were brought back to the ground as a group of ponies rushed across the crowd's line. I saw 3 of them fall, taking out a dozen more with flailing hooves as they all collapsed to the ground amidst the panic. There wasn't any order now. Ponies all ran in differing directions, even some back to the stadium. I dived, ducked, and weaved my way as best I could through the insane obstacle course of flailing hooves and bodies. All it would take is one stray hoof and I'd be helpless on the floor.
Slaves! Halt, or you will be fired upon! Halt, where you are now!
My instinct kicked in. I faltered, hooves trying to stop, but the crowd swept me on. The air was filled with screams, shrieks, and angry cries of bitter ponies trying to push their own way through. A young mare nearby clutched a lifeless buck, wailing as she cried over him, trampled to death. I saw 2 slaves begin fighting over who bumped who on purpose, hooves flying as they collapsed to the ground together. All around me, looks of terror ignored the commands across the PA system. I wondered if they had even heard it. Perhaps only I could.
Guards! Open fire!
Battle saddles unleashed a torrent of firepower from the walkways above. Miniguns roared, huge anti-material rifles boomed, and magical weapons lent their own unique and disturbing zaps to the volley. Griffin handheld weapons joined the cacophony of weapon sounds as they picked out individual targets from above the crowd. Only now did I realize what had been happening. The slave crowd I had ended up in was heading for the main gate. It had been accidental. I would bet most didn't know where they were going, in the mad rush out of the gunfire going around the stadium and roller coaster. But I saw what Red Eye's forces had to do. To their eyes, the slaves were making a break for it, and they intended to punish it with enough blood to quell any rebellion amongst the shapeless masses. Briefly it occurred to me that the majority of these slaves were not the ones whom had actually rebelled beneath the ice rink. The front ranks were torn asunder. Ponies fell in droves as the full assault of gunfire ripped into them. I could not see it, being too far back, but I heard the horrible sound of bullets impacting on flesh alongside the unsettling flares of ponies atomized or melted by magical energy weapons. The crowd swung to a halt and tried to double back, meeting the rest all coming behind them in a collision that broke bones and bloodied muzzles that met another unexpectedly. The sound was shocking, bodies slamming into one another, making far more crunches than they had any right to do. Trapped between gunfire, plowing collisions, and panic, I I didn't know what to do. My instinct said, go to your enclosure. My heart said, keep going. Escape. But I didn't know which to follow. Instead, I did the only other thing I know how to react like. I cried. Fear, surging emotion, and adrenaline were surging through me. I had never felt like this before. Emotion was not something I often knew outside of my crying. So now, with so much of it at once, I fell in the crowd and was thrown to and fro by it, unable to choose or know what to do. I felt my eyes water on sheer reaction at my inability to comprehend what I was actually doing, even as I felt myself knocked to the side by a large mare trying to fight her way back through the masses of ponies. My eyes blinked open, wiping my tears before shrieking and diving to the side to avoid a pony crashing to the floor near me, stone dead from a bullet to the forehead. Ahead, off to the side of the crowd, was number 6, the stallion. He wasn't waiting, but he had shouted to me as he ran off down the side street deeper into Philadelphia. Many other ponies were all trying to escape that way off the main road. I could see gunshots trying to stop them. Clearly, Red Eye wanted us to herd together. There were 2 choices. One followed the stallion into whatever place he was heading for, but to get to him, I would have to charge through an area pockmarked with bullets and sizzling with magical energy. A few ponies were making it through without harm toward that street, fine, but not all. The other was to stay here. Already I could feel the crowd quieting and beginning to falter under the brutal tactics of the slavers to restore order. I would perhaps be safe enough until led back to my enclosure. To dare or to falter. I looked out over the gunshots raking the area. I took a breath. Master Red Eye's voice boomed from the speakers.
Great workers of Philadelphia! Cease this pointless violence!
I faltered.
You have made such great strides with each passing day. Did I not reward such effort with the promise of a day of rest by the break of dawn today? Yes, and hear me. Know that I am not given to breaking my promises to your generous efforts. This day shall remain yours, but this trivial panic will serve none. Not you, not me, not the unity that we all dream of attaining, but most of all, not the children that we strive to take to a better place with the great effort that we, together, have made. I ask of you all, would the future ascension of a safe and secure Equestria be the result of panic and disorder? Was chaos itself not the hell that we, long ago, escaped from? Remember your potential, fellow Equestrians. Remember your sacrifices, and remember the generosity that we all must show.
I couldn't move. His voice. My master. The one who paid for me.
And it is thus that we must ask you to return, to go peacefully to your places of rest for now. My attendants will inform every pony of when we may return to the day of rest and joy that has been promised. We have all given so much together. I swear to you, it will not be long. Now go, return with order befitting a better Equestria, and let no more blood be shed this day.
The decision was made. My master had asked, even as I felt my heart screaming at me to remember what the pit had shown me. I obeyed. His words were backed up by reinforcements of slavers, sending groups of slaves in directed funnels towards enclosures. I presumed they would be sorted later on. For now, Master Red Eye only wanted them safe and docile. Well, far be it from me to disagree. My mind screamed at me that this was wrong. I ignored it. I had to return to my enclosure. My shift would be starting soon. I saw number 6 disappear down the street. He survived. Well, good for him. I stood still as slavers ran down the lines, directing us one way and another. I don't know how long I stood there, looking at my hooves, tears still dripping from my ever-flowing eyes, as I simply awaited my turn. You there! Get to the damned fun farm! Mare! No, not you. That one! Get back to your normal enclosure. Head down to the other side of Philly. Follow the griffins. You! The last was me. The slaver loomed over me, who didn't. With a whip magically floating beside him, I couldn't help but keep my eyes trained on the serrated and bloodied edge of the whip itself. With obedience, I lowered my head. You go back to the fun farm, slave, he shouted over the din around us, of a mass of slaves simply standing and feeling sorry for themselves. Corpses still littered the ground around us from the execution of them earlier. I began to see the reason. A simply practical solution to kill a few to stop them all, instead of an ongoing riot killing so many more. Just like number 6 killed that worker to remove evidence. It was just being practical. It wasn't my place to question. I was only ever the cog in the machine. In my thoughts, I didn't realize how much of a rush the slaver was in, until I saw the whip raise. I said back to the fun farm, you dirty little cut! The fun farm barn exploded. The building which I had seen the roller coaster crash into shook as its roof blew out with a gradual cracking and shattering of structure. Something colossal rose from it, sending shards of wood and brick flying in all directions around a glowing sphere of magical power. It rose slowly, gradually gaining height, with swirling smoke cascading around the sphere, driven by the magical energies being unleashed. Unlike in the pit, this didn't give me a feeling of hope and inspiration. It terrified me to the core. I didn't wait to see exactly what it was. Clearly something happening due to the mare's escape. Whatever she had done, her presence had woken some seriously big powers in Philadelphia that were struggling to keep hold of her. Silently, inside, I imagined, hoped that none of it would be enough. Shutting out the sounds, I darted to the side as the slaver was distracted, staring wide-eyed at the massive monstrosity on top of the fun farm. Dodging through freshly startled ponies, I made for the petting zoo. Perhaps I could just hide in a corner until all this blew over. Debris rained down from above as the conflict went on above us all. Ponies began running again, slavers among them, only this time, to panic was in all directions, as they sought not to flee Philadelphia or to get back to their areas, but simply to evade the scrap piling down from above. I saw a few ponies crushed under the light wood, recovering in dazed confusion. A few took shrapnel hits to the side, crying out in pain. From the stadium to here, my mind was only beginning to catch up with the consistent onrush of activity all around me. I dived into an old decrepit stall by the side of the Fun Farm roads to take shelter. Once inside, I simply shut my eyes, held my ears, and waited. Whatever powers were being unleashed out there, it was far too big for me. Better to just wait it out, then go back to being who I was. Even as I heard a second and even greater detonation above me that set off a minor earthquake across the fun farm, I simply hid and prayed that none of it would affect me. Even as the dust cloud washed over the stall and blew the roof clean off, all the while my mind fought with itself between the slave and the newly found hope. But old habits die hard. Hope lost. I had faltered back there. When given the choice between the free stallion and obeying my master, I had chosen to obey. Silence. Finally, there was silence. I didn't know how long I had hid. Perhaps it had been a few minutes, maybe an hour. The stuffy sky and red haze of Philadelphia do not offer much perspective on the time of day, but when I finally crawled out, choking on dust and bones aching with exertion, it was quiet. The crowds had dispersed for the most part. I still saw some slaves clustering in ditches beside the roads, or under what shelter they could, nursing wounds or huddled together for support. Occasional corpses still littered the fun farm's pathways and the street outside. About 100 meters away, I saw Master Red-Eye's guards beginning to clear the mass of bodies from the road, where the slavers had opened fire on the crowds. No slavers were nearby. The majority were no doubt busy with the recovery efforts to bother with a few stragglers who would be rounded up soon enough. Plus, Master Red-Eye himself had said this was still a day of rest for us. Some rest that turned out to be. But even as I turned in a full circle, I saw no sign of whiplash. I saw no griffins shooting at me, no stallion urging me to break the rules and follow, no unicorn mare inspiring me to shake off the chains at last. As I stood in the aftermath, I felt incalculably lonely. The peace wasn't to last long. My day had one last horror to inflict, one final challenge to overcome. As I made my way back to the petting zoo, intent on searching for my journal, I saw them. Ooh, look who it is! Little Runt didn't die after all. I did as I always did. I put my head down, tried to ignore them, and head for the pigsty. The pigsty was no longer there. I heard them trot up behind me before turning to face the music. I could sense this wasn't going to end well at all. I had no place to hide anymore, and there were no overseers around to stop them. I felt my sprained leg ache prematurely at the no doubt large amount of running to be involved soon. The trio were filthy, covered in grime, wounds, and dust from the massive crush earlier. I could only guess they wanted to take their anger out on some pony, and I had just wandered in right on time. They were all earth ponies, not exactly burly, but giants in comparison to me. 2 bucks and a mare. I could swear they were all related or something, for each of them had the same dirt brown coat, with only their manes to tell them apart. Black, dirty yellow, and crude green for the mare. Each wore ruined scraps of rags they called clothing. I was sure that they were simply for the intimidation factor of ripped fabric about their bodies. Their cutie marks were in turn a plank of wood with a nail through it. What? 3 small rocks. He threw similar sizes at me. A lot. And the mare's was a lasso. She had once proven that talent by binding me in rope and hanging me from the fence until Whiplash found me after her apparent brothers in harm had used me as a piñata. Apparently that had been my fault somehow. They were despicable ponies, but they had never been truly deadly, just an aggravation, and at worst, a torturous presence that brought pain and suffering to an already miserable life that seemed to be changing.
So we was thinkin', spat the mare. You was meant to die in that pit, right?
And you didn't, somehow,
the black-maned buck added, while circling around me, slowly. They had lethal looks in their eyes. I began to feel the fear creep down my back. Their voices were different, rebellious and full of menace, not the whiny posturing of before. I backed away, trying to keep all 3 in my sight. I was let out because of what happened, I muttered, my head low. I didn't want to look them in the face, and I'm told to return here. I just want to go to sleep. I won't disturb you. Arg! While I had been speaking, the first buck rushed me from behind and barreled me over into the mud, in front of where the pigsty used to be. I hit the ground hard, letting out a little whine as my injuries flared all the more from the fresh impact. Behind me, the 3 gathered together, grinning wickedly. So we was thinkin', she continued, apparently the de facto leader for today, "if you died now, to entertain us, no pony would ever notice, nor care, right? Could just blame it on the riots earlier, before that big sphere pony thing blew up atop the fun farm. Oh, goddesses, they weren't wanting to just beat me. They wanted blood." I swiveled on the ground, twisting to look at them as I felt that damn tooth come loose again. Why couldn't I just be left in peace to slave away? The fear from before returned. Only now this wasn't the arena of my nightmares. This was reality. 3 ponies wanted to kill me, and were going to do so. This just wasn't fair. I had chosen to avoid dying to stay with Master Red-Eye, and now they wanted to kill me. This just wasn't fair! I screamed, my thoughts exploding into reality. The surprise on their faces made them cease in their steps. Any other pony, that stallion maybe, might have seen an opportunity to attack, to hit them first. But I wasn't like that. I ran. They didn't take long to recover at all, for even as I slipped and staggered out of the mud to gallop towards the exit of the petting zoo, I heard the clatter of their hooves behind me. In my mind, something clicked. The instincts of a runt who grew up having to avoid the big brothers of the world, wanting to find and hurt me. I recalled the time the slaves at the rock farm had chased me through the field because my lack of work had earned them all punishment. I couldn't outrun other ponies with their longer strides. Instead, I tried weaving, diving over bits of fence and ducking under stall doors to stay ahead of them as the chase broke out onto the fun farm. Other slaves and the occasional busy slaver glanced at it, seeing 3 larger ponies chasing after a little runt scampering about with tears in his eyes ahead of them. My size let me dive into areas they couldn't. I saw an area between a fun house
where you can keep smiling forever,
and a merchandise stand ahead of me. A thin alleyway. If I could get through, perhaps I could escape. I could go find that stallion again, take up his offer, and escape these ponies forever. "Can't run forever, runt. Gonna break you." The buck's voice rang out shockingly close behind. Turning my head, I saw him approach, running low and catching up horrifyingly fast. Whinnying in fear, I ran into the space of the alley and got stuck. Even my malnourished body was just a little too thick. I got jammed in the first 6 inches, my head and front legs held in the air as the back half of my body scrambled fiercely on the ground to try and push myself through. I could sense them galloping closer, hear their screams of triumph, and cried out as I felt myself not budge. "Got you now, little runt. All jammed up for us." I panicked. My hooves could barely reach the ground. I felt myself pushed an inch forward. I had a few seconds at most. I couldn't even look back to see them. The gap was so thin. Claustrophobic feelings rang in my head as I shook and felt myself jam all the more tightly in place. "Got you." "No!" I felt hooves grab my rump, strength more than my own beginning to pull me back out of the gap. Incoherent shouting came from me. I didn't even know what I was saying as I lashed out in fear at the unknown assailant from behind. With a sharp crack, I felt my back right hoof connect with something, the impact shoving me forward into the gap far enough to pop past the thinner areas into the alleyway. Twisting at last, I saw the black-haired buck, lying on the ground, nursing a bleeding muzzle before looking up at me with wild fury in his eyes. His companions had split off, running around. I couldn't waste any time. Beyond the alleyway there was a small fence. The few seconds it took me to find a box, Celestia, send my small height to the damned moon, gave them an opportunity to catch up, only just missing me as I dived out of the fun farm into... Actually, I didn't even know where I was going. As it turned out, it wasn't a particularly easy fall on the other side. It wasn't a particularly short one either. I screamed as I fell the 10 feet to the sloped back areas of the fun farm, rolling and scraping down a rocky embankment into a muddy refuse pit filled with piles of old scrap from the rides of the park. Crashing into the ground at a high speed, I felt my entire rib cage buckle from the impact as I lay still, struggling to breathe and feeling the burns on my body from the mudslide down the ditch wall. Annoyingly, that pink pony's mantra to
Look before you make that hop, skip, and jump
from the auto-recorded Fun Farm Play Park speakers seemed like all too good advice right now. Oh, how I detested that happy-go-lucky voice, reminding me of making mistakes. I staggered to my hooves, glancing around before falling again in the same spot. The ground here was without any grip, even to a pony with perfectly fit muscles and good balance, of which I had neither. Perhaps if I had enough time...
Gotcha, you slippery little bugger.
The second buck's distinctive accent shouted to me as I turned to witness them sliding down the same embankment with greater care than my haphazard fall. Oh, come on, goddesses, cut me a break! I didn't even have time to move before he charged directly into me, sending me sliding back across the mud into a pile of scrap. The unbalanced pile came roaring down around me, distracting the bullies as they slid their way across the mud, dodging random appliances and hunks of metal from the roller coasters that had rolled off the main pile, with a sound like an ironmonger's being demolished. I felt a slab of metal slap me across the back of the head, knocking me face down in front of them. Well. The mare was out of breath as she reached down and plucked a broken and sharp-looking pipe from the scrap with her mouth. Guess we get to have fun now. I just lifted my weary hooves in front of me. I could run or fight no more. The day's exertion and mental exhaustion was taking its toll. My body simply could not bring itself to move with any urgency. Please, don't. I'll be your slave, too. Whatever you want.
All we want is a chance to let off some steam. Do the things we got to do before we were brought in here,
commented the black-haired buck, stamping his hoof with intent on using just them.
And after that little buck you gave me, I've half a mind to return the favor tenfold.
The things they did outside, these ponies weren't bullies, they were gangers. Stripped of their freedom to do as they wished, their claws had been neutered, so to speak. Today's riots had reminded them of who they were, and I was their celebration. Time to die, Runt. It's been a fun few months. I closed my eyes, not even crying anymore. Perhaps life just knew that my time was up after all. The raiders screamed, but not in anger, in fear. I dared to open my eyes before shutting them quickly again. The entire environment was green. Above us, roaring through the sky, was something flying with wings, glowing so brightly with its massive size that it was like a miniature radioactive sun in the air. I had seen one of these things before, a balefire phoenix. Only this one was massive. It soared above us, the sight terrifying the gangers as it flew close to the ground, the heat emanating from it making me squeal in discomfort as I saw the raiders simply flee to escape the heat. Only the mud caking me acted like a coolant to allow me to bear the conflagration that now soared toward a building top in Philly, surrounded by multiple pink pony face balloons. Something else was going on. At that moment, I began to get a sense of how small in the world I truly was. If powers like this were at work, then truly I was meant for nothing, as I witnessed the passing of a greater story. Even as I lay there and watched along with every other slave and slaver in Philadelphia, We were in awe as the massive beast stood atop the building. We couldn't see what it was facing, but somehow my heart just knew. It was her. We were onlookers, the crowd gazing at the passing of history as we saw the phoenix curve from balloon to balloon, igniting them with scorching green rad flame. I couldn't help a little satisfied grin as I saw at least a few of that damn pony's leering faces go down in flames, never to immortally stare at me every day again. It had come from nowhere. Not for me, I was just the witness. Just as I had been to the mayor's escape and the colossal beast atop the fun farm. I could not know the context or connection between them. All I knew was that it was all a signal to make a choice. The goddesses, or that mare and her allies, had granted me a second chance. To dare, or to falter. I lay down there for hours. The phoenix had long gone. The commotion on the building, whatever it was, now finished. I knew in my heart that the mare had escaped. With allies like that huge radioactive beast, how could she not? But now, I just sat in the mud. What else could I do? I couldn't go back to the petting zoo until I knew I would be protected by slavers from those gang ponies. I couldn't strike out alone. The guards were ready to shoot on sight. So instead, I just wandered the refuse slowly, limping and trying to make sense of the day. My mind was at war once again. Part of me wanted to avoid all this, go back to what my cutie mark and my life told me I should do. Be a slave. That is what I am. But the other half could not forget that mysterious mare who had defied Red-Eye before my eyes in such iconic fashion. To escape! To lead your own life! How could I not want that too? But what would I even do with freedom? I couldn't make sense of the emotion, from the mare in the pit to the mare who had looked at my sketchbook, from the gang trying to kill me to the stallion murdering and torturing ponies to help me escape with him. I realized I didn't even know any of their names. I thought back to drawing my own pictures, to wailing as I saw my mother in my own charcoal's rendition. A whole day of coincidence, luck, discovery, pain, and miracles. More than in the rest of my life combined. How could I, a slave whom had never had to think for himself until today, make sense of all this? I bucked a scrap heap in frustration, before screaming as the resulting toppling revealed not more scrap, but the skeleton of a pony. The blackened bones clattered out, knocking against my legs even as I backpedaled furiously and fell on my rump again. Staring with wide eyes, I saw it was covered in rags and metal plates like makeshift armor. It was buckled and burned, probably from the megaspells. It wasn't the first time I had seen a skeleton. Hell, I had lived in the wastes most of my life. But something struck me. Around its foreleg lay what at first appeared scrap metal, but memory pipped into my head. That mare's cutie mark. Before me lay the devastated and wrecked version of one of those devices. With shaking hooves, I tugged it off the skeleton's leg and began to turn it over a few times, studying it through wet eyes. The lock that kept it attached to the leg was broken. In fact, it wasn't even there at all. The screen was cracked, and some buttons were missing entirely. On the inside, I saw exposed electronics and magic crystals that had shattered inside. And yet, I saw a small light flickering on it. The device was still active. Curiosity overcame fear. I started prodding at the machine, hoofing the buttons and turning dials. I even started fiddling with the wires, but to no avail. The most I could get from it was a sort of white noise when I hit one button that lasted until I hit it again. With a great cry of frustration, I threw down the device, the button clacking on again, to fill the air with white noise as I let out every wound-up emotion I had on the offending device. I had been changed by one day. I didn't even know what I was thinking, let alone what to do. How was I meant to make sense of all this? Mysterious mares and stallions, huge balefire phoenixes and random monsters popping out of buildings, a chance to escape, and my damned instincts forcing me to stay and act out the slave life I was meant for? Learning to draw for my own? Being within death's reach twice in one day? Or more? Who knows how many bullets missed me? I was beaten, bruised, scared, bleeding, sick, and probably dying within a month. And now this damned device refused to tell me anything I needed to make sense of it when I thought I had found a fucking link. With one hoof, I screamed and hurled the device away from me with a great cry of rage. How am I meant to make sense of all this? I galloped over, weary and sore, shouting at the device, as though it were the cause of all this. I'm just a little slave. I don't have any freedom. I don't have any dreams. What am I meant to do? I collapsed, my head resting against it, nudging a dial to twist it. I need someone to help me. Anyone. Just someone to show me the way. The dial twisted one bit more. The white noise stopped.
Oh, Wastelanders. This is, of course, your friendly little light in the good old horrible equestrian wastelands, day in and out, DJ Pone 3. I'm here with, you guessed it, that thing that used to give us all the blues. Yep, it's the news. And let me tell you, little ponies, do I have some good stuff for you today. Following the activities of every pony's favorite stable dweller out in the blasted pit of Philadelphia.
Footnote. Percatained. Lucky break. Whatever has changed for you, it has been for the better. Perhaps you have been working on a sixth sense, or maybe you found a lucky charm. You gain +1 to your luck statistic.